positive, caring and safe sports climate is essential for the healthy development of athletes. Now, one of the responsibilities of parties involved in organizing sports is to create a safe sports climate. But in practice, difficulties in creating such a climate are still experienced. In recent times, Amazulu matchday security officer Smanga Mchunu has been slapped with a 3-month ban from all football activities. And that's for making distasteful comments towards an unnamed female Orlando Pirates official. And elsewhere, Redbull's Formula One team principal Christian Horner was thrust into the spotlight last month when allegations of inappropriate behaviour were made against him by a female employee at Redbull. It seems implementation prevention programs solely focused on coaches or the environment is not a comprehensive approach. Therefore, there needs to be development of prevention programs aimed at empowering athletes and stimulating their resistance towards sexual violence. To help us understand the psychological impacts of such acts on young and vulnerable athletes, we're now joined by a sports psychologist, Dr. Koketjo Tsebe, who's joining us from Accra, Ghana. Dr. Koketjo, thank you so much for joining us here on the AM Report and for giving us a bit of your time.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Good morning to you and to the viewers.
Now let's get into this very topical issue, because every once in a while we're hearing of such incidents of, sexual abuse and sexual assault within the sports environment, and one gets the sense that it is quite a prevalent occurrence. What have you observed in your experience?
All right. Thank you for that question, Indy. I believe this is a discipline or concerns that have been underreported. Of course, I've had contact having to deal with some of the cases, but it's been largely underreported for various reasons, which could also be maybe there's lack of support for victims or also lack of policies and code of conduct in the sporting environment.
Yeah, and you're talking about this being underreported. Do you think maybe this has something to do with the kind of environment that has been created for some of the athletes? Because we're seeing a trend where in a male-dominated sports in particular, you would see these instances, but also in the female sports where you have caregivers and coaches that are males, that's where you're seeing quite a lot of this. Could it be the case of environments that are fertile for such incidents to take place?
Of course, Andy, you spoke about sports being a male-dominated field, which could mean that if you look at it, not that all of the time perpetrators are males, but there's cases whereby mostly it's males, predominantly because males are actually mostly in position of power, which could also be a risk factor, and also indicating that I did mention about maybe there's also an element of having poor understanding and lack of training and expertise in as far as how to deal with cases relating to safeguarding in sports.
Yeah, and that also then brings the next question, which is, when you have such incidents, in your experience, have you seen that it is something that people know how to navigate and how to deal with in the appropriate manner?
I must say, Andy, that actually the IOC, as the mother body of Olympic sports, is advocating for this, and for that also SASCOC as a mother body in the South African context, it's promoting and really encouraging safeguarding that also that federations are able to train and align with the IOC safeguarding certificate. So it's actually promoting it. It's a work in progress, and I believe that it does have an impact also to sporting leaders and also to the athletic environment.
But have we seen this being applied practically? And I ask this because in most instances, people get sent for gender sensitivity training, and it seems very theoretical, but in practical sense, this is not being translated to any change in behavior.
I believe, Andy, that a lot can still be done, because remember, I think the IOC have adopted this probably in 2020, which is quite recent. I believe that a lot can still be done, mostly across all boards. And like you mentioned about the inclusion of it being more comprehensive, which would mean that it will include an interplay between different stakeholders, which would include different mother bodies, the legal processes, which will oversee issues of reports and also adopt certain code of conduct and policies, because it would also encourage victims to be able to report, which also talks to another layer, which means that victim support is also important, and also education, more awareness is also required. So by so doing, by having an interplay and an interaction between different parties or other role players, it actually can have potential to be more effective. And
I want us to move into the impact of this, because we're discussing what could lead to this. the impact on the other side, on the athletes, things such as being a little bit more body conscious, having, eating disorders. What are some of the things that you've observed that could be a result of one who has been a victim of such a behavior at work?
All right, and the implications of sexual abuse or safeguarding issues in sports has both physical and psychological implications, which mostly physical ones are more noticeable, complaints such as headache, concerns of a fluctuating weight, and many other physical symptoms. Whereas the psychological ones are less, they are more subtle because they are not obviously or observable, hence the need to do more education and awareness. And actually, it can also trigger or lead to the development of mental health conditions such as anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. So it does have severe mental health implications, and also have an ever long-lasting implications and impact on both the victim and the sports organization.
Yeah, and if you're looking at the incidents that we highlighted at the top of this, chat, looking at the F1 boss Christian Horner, or even the recent PSL DC case, in instances like that where it's not so clear that the perpetrator or the alleged perpetrator will be asked to leave, or maybe they would need to have a continuing working relationship, how does one then navigate that going forward?
All right, so how one navigates such through, I mentioned previously how important it is to have experts involved, specifically on safeguarding in sports. Because when you have knowledge and understanding and training, you are able to be able to navigate when dealing with such instances. You're also able to know how to accommodate to deal with the situation, how to empower the victim in this case, and also what would be the implications, therefore, of a perpetrator who is involved in safeguarding in sports.
So let's look at this then in practical terms. So if you are dealing with, an athlete that has been a victim of this, what work goes into making sure that once they've had this impact, maybe they've gone into depression, they are still able to perform at the highest level and still able to continue with the role that they expected to perform?
All right, navigating through such kind of cases practically, Andy, would involve, let's say, for instance, as a psychologist, we do know that we have an ethical code of conduct that actually guides on how we should deal with issues, especially around abuse. It's also to empower, provide psychotherapy to a victim here, whom we refer it to as a patient, and also there's lines around reporting, and also the limits of confidentiality. They're very much important to discuss, where you also need to encourage the athletes in this context of sports on how we'll have to maneuver the process of having to report, because this is also a form of abuse in nature. And in addition to empowering that, like I said, there should also be a conducive space that also allows, with clear reporting procedures, to say to whom does it go after? Do we have proper legal processes? Because that on its own, the flow and the clear guidelines are able to create an easy way to be able to report cases and also encourage others to be able to share their experiences.
So how do we then get that right? Because you've mentioned right at the top of the chat that the incidents are quite severely underreported, and there isn't really incentive for victims to speak up. And if you're looking at that recent incident, the victim who did speak up against the F1 boss has now been suspended with the boss still at work. So how does that change going forward?
There's a need, agent call actually, to create a sporting environment that promotes safe sports, and also advocate strongly on the protection and prevention of all parties that are involved in sports. And I emphasize the importance of policies, and not just having policies, Indy, but also adhering and acting to it, because by so doing, it makes the system be able to be open and promote safe sport in sports.
I feel like this is a conversation that's been ongoing for quite a while. Something does need to change drastically, though, if we are to change things. It's been a conversation. What would you say are the actions that need to be taken now, both from a higher level at the federation, such as SASCOC, or even on the ground, if you're looking at educating perhaps even the youngsters on the dangers of, sexual assault and what it is in the workplace or in sports that they should be looking out for?
A greater, more relationship also between sporting bodies and the criminal justice system, because also this is a criminal offense, issues around sexual violence or sexual harassment in sports. So a stronger, more relationship and clarity that create also the flow of reporting, and also punishment. And it also important that there's also implications for one who's also found guilty, so that the victim is also be able to be supported, and also the perpetrator can be able to be rehabilitated also to prevent future reoffense, and also advocate for a sporting context also that promotes safeguarding in sports.
Yeah, more stringent measures and more severe penalties for those that are transgressors. That's what Dr. Koketjo Tsebe is saying. Thank you so much for joining us here on the AM Report, and certainly going to be keeping an eye on those incidents, unpacking exactly what it is on the psychological side that could lead to these incidents of sexual abuse, and more importantly, how to navigate it if you have been a victim of such.